Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 232. And we're going to talk about the Rogan podcast where he had Donald Trump on as a guest. So, quick summary first. I'm going to try to go as fast as you can. It was a 3-hour episode. I had it playing back at 1.5 speed to get it through because I really didn't have 3 hours to sit around and listen to this. And I will say ahead that I really don't like Trump. I mean, basically, I'm in the camp of not Kamala Harris, right? So, but I mean, as a person, I could tolerate him. Like I enjoyed watching The Apprentice for the first couple of seasons, and then just kind of got tired of it. But I did enjoy the show. I didn't like some of the decisions he made on the show. Nevertheless, it got me to understand that he's just a guy, a successful business guy, and has a good business sense. So anyway, let's get into the interview or the conversation, I call it, the conversation he had with Joe Rogan. And they're getting a lot of hate for it, but I mean, to be honest, Joe Rogan is the number one podcaster in the world. So one might argue that he is a better journalist, more popular, different kind of journalist than you might see on mainstream media. Anyway, they began by judging by what he said about how he would conduct an interview with Kamala Harris, he basically just wanted to get to know the guy and then also ask about some specific things. So they began with what was it like to be elected? I mean, you were a businessman and now all of a sudden you're president of the United States. And so Trump went off talking about the Lincoln bedroom. It was just kind of interesting, right? So this is the first political position he has. He's president. And he's never governed before. And immediately he's told that he has to pick 100 people. So basically, he said something like 10,000 people or something like that. But uh, basically, the people that he picked, the initial 100 people he picks, they're going to then turn around and pick 100 people each, I guess. That's kind of the way things must go, where you it's that system of patronage that the United States tried to get rid of for like 100 years, but was never successful. And even if they did think that they got rid of patronage, that is, once you get into political office, you award your friends by giving them jobs in the government. Although people couldn't really, or maybe technically or on paper, they got rid of patronage, it still goes on. It's obvious that it still goes on. But anyway, so he had all these people to a point. He was always a business person. He didn't know other politicians, generals, or whatever. He didn't know any of these people, so he had to rely on certain people who he thought he could trust, right? So basically, he said that, there never was a business person to rise to the office of president. I mean, you had other politicians, you had generals, military men, you had actors, but never a person who basically just did business most of his life. Now, I would throw a little bit of shade on that only because, particularly in the 1800s, there were several presidents who basically had jobs first, and then they got into politics, and then suddenly found themselves running for president, right? So there's that. But, whatever. Donald Trump was never really a detailed guy. It's all about the broad strokes. And so he's not writing a dissertation where all of the details seem to matter, or a scientific experiment where the details seem to matter. He's just simply speaking off the cuff that, hey, a guy whose first political position is president, and the year before he was running a business, that's never happened, and I will give him that. So everyone wants cabinet positions publicly. And he mentions this. He said publicly, certain people he wanted to ask, they would say, "Oh no, I would never take that job." But then when you talk to them privately, they're like, "Oh, thank you so much. I really wanted this job." And so obviously people want power. And I mentioned that in yesterday's sermon. I thought that was kind of interesting. But uh, he picked but John Bolton right after he picked that warmonger John Bolton. This guy named Ruff warned him don't stay away from Bolton, but he already hired him. I don't understand why he can't just get rid of him, but there it is. I think the way Trump is that once he taps you for a job, then he tries to see how long you can do well on it. Although he did say that sometimes having Bolton next to him or behind him came in handy because he intimidated other people. Um, which I don't think is a good thing either. Anyway, he talks about tariffs and how great they are. Eye roll, cue the eye roll from me. His knowledge of economics, especially international trade, I think is out of his range because he's more about real estate, right? That's where most of his business uh, focused, right, is hotels, golf courses, right? So it's about real estate, not international trade. And so I don't think he really understands the tariff. Hopefully, some of the people that he picks that Elon Musk will introduce to him will help him straighten all that out. But anyway, he does talked about income tax versus tariffs, and he did mention that early period in America where there was no income tax and we just ran on tariffs. Of course, it would be a long, long way to get there from here, especially today, where we just simply inflate the currency. We don't even really tax. Now, and he praises Elon Musk. He talks about the Space Force. He's now how great that is that I started that. And then he praised Elon Musk, obviously, because he's trying to go to Mars. But if Elon Musk does become part of his administration and it's the Efficiency Bureau or whatever you're going to call it, and he does slash government by 80% like Javier Milei is doing, or the way he did Twitter slash X, then maybe you could get away with just simply going on tariffs, right? It's possible. Right. But first, you got to pay down the debt. So you ease off the income tax the whole time you're going to be paying down the debt. And you will usher in a different kind of America if you live that long, right? Obviously, because if you slash 80% of government, they're going to come after you better than they did at Butler, and they won't hide it either. All right. So he also talked about lowering the corporate tax to bring money back. And people who don't really know what that means is that when the tax is really high here, then international corporations, they just simply park their money in a different country that has a lower tax rate. And so what he was proposing by lowering corporate taxes is repatriation of dollars. And so if you lower the tax rate and they bring all that cash back, then they end up paying the same rate of taxes, but they'll have so much more money to be able to reinvest in their business, expand their business, do research, try to streamline their business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then he talked about Cervasis, that's the Corona, that without it, he probably would have been able to bring down the debt. But because of it, they just printed money like crazy. Obviously, we know how that goes. But unfortunately, there was no apology about the policy about Fauci. They didn't really get into that. However, I'm pretty sure he took ivermectin, right? And it's interesting. And I think he pointed out to Rogan that he took ivermectin as well. And just an interesting side note, I was going through over the summer, I was watching House MD episodes, and it was either the last season or the season before. Ivermectin came up in one of the episodes. They're saying, why don't we prescribe ivermectin? It's great for this kind of stuff. I was going to do a screenshot, but I just got too tired. I didn't do it. But anyway, then he talked about drilling for oil, that the United States would be drilling oil like crazy, except for the environmentalists. Environmentalists, don't know really what's going on. They're just simply blindly trying to uh, you know, um, preserve open land, but without considering that people can do it safely. I don't think he got into it. I think what he was implying was that if you impose liability, right, you make the companies responsible for any environmental damage, then they'll be really, really safe. I mean, think about what we're doing. He got into windmills and how they're, killing whales in the Atlantic, which is true, right? Because of all the drilling that you need to make the foundations for the windmills. Also, when the windmills are in operation, they vibrate. They send vibrations throughout the ocean, and it's driving the whales crazy, which is why they're all washing up on the on the shores, right? They talked about nuclear energy and how they're dangerous, but then he sort of was talking about how dangerous they were, but then he talked about the innovations on how to make nuclear energy much more compact so you wouldn't have huge nuclear reactors, you could have something different. I would have talked about thorium or even using recycling uranium, right? So a lot of the uranium that no longer uh, uh, is no longer good fuel for existing reactors. They just get stuck in Yucca Mountain over in Nevada or something like that. But if you go to Europe, they have nuclear power plants which use recycled uranium. You could also use thorium, right? And so there are all these other options. Come on, we're in the 21st century, but they didn't get into that. That's fine. He's really big on his accomplishments. I forget what he was talking about. I think the economy. Then they got into Afghanistan and how he was trying to get them out, right? They were in discussion, and then of course he wasn't reelected. I know that Colonel McGregor was in charge of drawing up plans to withdraw from Afghanistan. They were going to do it really in an orderly fashion. People were lying to him, telling him it'll take 5 years, but that's because they were hoping that he would, not be president anymore by the time they were about to start, and so they can just, scrap all that plans and remain in Afghanistan. But of course, Biden got everyone out, and shame on them for the way that they did it. It's cheaper. They said it's cheaper to leave all the equipment there for the enemy to have it, without instead of just pulling it all out. And if you watch my episode on The Covenant, the movie The Covenant, it the way that take on what happened in Afghanistan, the treatment of the translators is just so hateful, right? And I think I titled the episode "You Don't Hate the Government Enough," right? But you just like just overwhelmed with disgust at our government, how it lies and betrays people left and right and doesn't really even care. Never talks about it. Most of America don't care either, so shame on them. And then interestingly, he talks about the enemy within, right? Ooh, enemy within. But he immediately shifted to a broader context, right? All the people who are anti-America, who live and are part of American society and government, right? He talked about it in the context of war. He also talked about the illegal immigration, how we're letting in murderers and rapists. I mean, we are literally flying in first class murderers and rapists from other countries. It's just insane. Why are we doing that? And I mentioned this before, I cannot fathom how this would make sense to anyone but a psychopath, someone who is devoid of any kind of moral sense. For anyone else, it just doesn't make any sense. I did note that he talks a lot. He interrupted Joe Rogan a lot. And at this point, I guess we're an hour and a half in or 2 hours in, and they started talking about UFC. And Trump loves the UFC. That's why he always goes to those matches. And I don't really watch. I don't think I've ever watched UFC. I just can't. The whole violence thing. It's just I get it. I used to watch boxing, then I realized, wow, this is really I just couldn't watch it, right? Uh Probably because I can't fight either, right? I use intimidation, but I can't fight, right? Maybe if I scrapped, but even then, if I was up against someone who trained, who knows jujitsu, I probably would tap out in 2 seconds. But when they started talking about UFC, man, he became the interviewer asking Joe Rogan lots and lots of questions, right? And so I was like, wait, what's going on here? But he really, and I joked around with my family that, oh, he agreed to the interview because he wanted to talk to Joe Rogan about UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship, whatever that's called, stands for. Then he talked about RFK Jr. And Trump mentioned that Big Pharma was not happy with him, that he said that he was going to work with RFK Jr. because clearly the things that RFK Jr. wants to do is a big threat to Big Pharma, including, the companies that gave us the jab, right? The Corona Cervasis jab. Then they talked about the polio vaccine. Vaccines in general, I gotta say, because I read the vaccination against smallpox by Edward Jenner, And we talked about it. We had a science professor come in and give us an orientation before we had to teach the classes. Vaccinations are extremely problematic, right? They're not like this problem-free solution to a certain disease. I mean, a lot of people died in the process, right? And no one really talks about that. So vaccinations are, interesting, and I think should be made voluntary as well, just because the side effects are just so surprising, right? And if you did not experience any side effects, then you're like, oh no, they're totally safe. But, can you speak for all the people who were hurt as a result of jabs? And I'm not just talking about, cervasis jab. I'm talking about smallpox jab. I mean, there were outbreaks all over the place. It was just, it was insane. So they were people were forced to take it in places where smallpox did not exist, and then all of a sudden, people are dying left and right from smallpox. It's pretty crazy. And they do mention in the podcast that, it's a little tricky when you look at the stats. And then Joe Rogan, after the podcast, he was talking with his buddies, and they were saying, if you look at the charts, it's not like this direct causal thing. And I agree that especially in England when they were doing the smallpox jabs, because there's so many people dying of smallpox, because of the jab that they gave them, they said, why don't we just clean up the neighborhood, right? Have better sewage system, and they got the same result, right? So courts out, of course, obviously no one cares anymore because it has been eradicated, so they think. Then they go into the election, 2020 election. He says that, the election, if you had to sort of listen really carefully, because he kind of talks, he meanders through the thing. He's never direct. And he says, that the margin of victory for Biden was so slim that one could argue that the laptop suppression, the censorship, Russian collusion story, all of that collectively gave the election to Biden. That's an interesting argument. I've never heard him say that all the way. I don't listen to him. So hearing him say that, oh, now it makes sense, all this other stuff that he was saying. So I think it's plausible, right? That there was a lot of election interference, which gave Biden the presidency, right? I mean, the laptop story alone should have just ruined it for him, but of course it was blamed on Russia. Then they talked about having Kamala on the podcast, right? I think really that, if for the Democrats, they should push for it as well, for her to be able to have a 3-hour conversation with someone. But of course, she already said, if I'm going to go on there, these are all the conditions. And Rogan said no. Then they talk about the secret files on the JFK assassination, on UFOs. It's kind of funny, right? But Trump seemed to say that, that some people who would be hurt by revealing all the files, they're still alive, so he's not going to do the JFK reveal. But now that RFK is part of his cabinet, if he wins, he definitely is going to release those files. He should release the Epstein files. Come on. And they talk about World War III, and then they talk about making a deal, how he meets world leaders, and it's all about making a deal. And that's why he says those over to the top things, which really drives me bonkers, like, oh, I'm going to impose a 200% tariff on all goods. He's doing that as a negotiation tactic. And in the way that it frustrates me, I think it really freaks out politicians, because politicians don't talk that way. And that's how he's able to do it. But it wouldn't be surprising to me to see more people, more politicians moving into the future, saying to hell with diplomacy, let's just bargain and negotiate and haggle like Trump did. That'd be pretty funny. All right, so that was the interview. I'll give some closing thoughts on it. Trump has a public persona. When he gets on that stage and he starts giving a campaign stump speech, he's a different person. But when he's on a smaller set talking to a person, he's a different person. That persona is not there. That over the top, larger than life, exaggerating braggadocio is not there. My wife, who just cannot stand Donald Trump, watched the podcast with Trump and a bunch of young comedians, and she was really, really surprised at how sharp he was, how he was able to relate and make the comedians laugh. So that was really eye-opening for her. Uh, the stamina of Trump is insane, right? He did, so Rogan said afterwards that he came in without using the bathroom. The whole 3 hours, they did it without stopping for him to go to the bathroom. And then he left without going to the bathroom, right? And so that is the bladder of a very young man, if you know what I'm saying. It wasn't no body double either. So, and after he left there, he went on and did some other appearances. I mean, the dude is a machine. And Rogan even asked him about it, and he credits his genetics, right? And it has to be that. He's not taking anything. He's not like RFK Jr. He's on a testosterone therapy. No, no, he just is genetically blessed so that he's at that age still sharp, mentally sharp, and able to maintain the schedule that he maintains. He does play a lot of things close to the vest. And so what I previously thought was him being just really stupid. No, he actually realizes that there is a distinction and he has to take care with some of the things that he says, right? And I think this is a carryover from his business experience. You can't just tell everything. You can't put everything on the table because then your opponent, whoever ends up sitting on the other side of the table, will know exactly what you have. And so even in this very laid back conversation, he did not tell all, as it were. Uh, he is also a businessman, which means that he knows that violence is bad for business. So, in other statements, when he would say that he would help Israel, he's all totally pro-Israel. Exactly how he would help Israel is not clear, especially since he established that he knows that violence is bad, bad for business, bad for the country, right? That's why he immediately went and talked to North Korea's leader, to Russia's leader, China's leader, right? He went and talked to them first because violence is bad. It's not, no good can come from that, right? And so I think that really, really impressed me a lot. I think because he goes out of the box, he doesn't follow the political etiquette or any of that. Neocons explode, right? Because they want the conflict, they want the war, and he looks at it from what is beneficial for the country if the country was a business. Yeah, going to war is not good for the country, and I think that's why people are trying to unalive him, right? Because he refuses to follow the game plan of pursuing war, regime change, all that stuff. He's not doing it, which makes him a clear threat to the deep state. And yet, people I know will never watch it, right? There are people I know who are posting things on social media, right, where they're saying these ridiculous, they're quoting Tyson DeGrassi, whatever that guy's name is, who should stay in his lane, but constantly talking about things about which he just falls flat on his face, right? I'm surprised. Maybe he's on the Diddy list, right? Maybe he's on the P. Diddy list, and that's why he's saying the things that he says. Or maybe he's on the Epstein list. I don't know. But the things that he says are ridiculous. All you had to do is watch this episode of Rogan's podcast and realize that all of the stuff that they've been saying about Trump is not true, right? You're not going to see a Hitler, right? You're going to see the very opposite of a Hitler. And obviously, I did an episode or two on projection. The Democrats project, right? So everything that they are doing, they project onto Trump. So actually, they are the ones who are acting like Hitler. So the people calling Trump Hitler are the actual Hitlers, right? And if all those people who hate Trump watch an unedited, full length uh, you know, stream of Kamala Harris, they probably wouldn't like her as much either. And it's unfortunate that people, after going to university, learning about primary sources, rely on people who lie to them. It's just unfortunate, really. But I trust that there are people who are out there who are honest. No, even my wife. I mean, come on. she hated Trump, all right? And she watched that comedian podcast, and it's not that she's in love with Trump now, but she realizes that a lot of the stuff that she saw on the media, on social media and the news, were heavily, heavily edited. So if people are really honest about wanting to know more, then there's hope, right? So again, what I'm saying is probably the people who need to watch this are never going to watch it, right? But some people will, and that's where the hope is. And so I hope that there are a lot of people who, 35 million people watched it on YouTube alone. So I'm hoping that many, many more millions watch it or listen to it on Spotify or other platforms. Um, and watch this and other episodes like it. And I hope that there are many people who watch it and realize, okay, so he's not perfect, but there is something about him which would at least maybe blunt some of the pain that is coming. Because certainly, as I said before, yeah, he's not going to help us. The economy is going to collapse. I think the only thing that might save us if Elon Musk gets in there and then cuts government by 80%. Then there's hope. But I doubt that that's even going to be possible. I think they're all going to have accidents if they even think it, right? But anyway, that is the hope that more and more people realize that they're being lied to, that, he's not perfect, but he's not certainly Hitler. But that's it. Hopefully you found this informative. Like it, subscribe, watch it on a more convenient platform for yourself. But I will talk to you next time.